What's up, YouTube? This is Iris, and just wanted to do a quick, kind of off-the-cuff review of the Dark Tower movie. I am a huge fan of the books, and I've been looking forward to this movie pretty much since I started reading them. I always thought it would be a great idea for a movie, and was really excited to see what they could do with it. I saw the movie the first day that it came out, and I really enjoyed it. I was in a theater with a friend of mine who I had read the books with previously, and also the people behind us were also really big fans. And after seeing the movie, we were all gushing about how great it was. So I was completely blown away by the fact that when I'm looking up reviews of the movie, there's all this negativity. There's a lot of people who just do not like this movie. And I honestly don't understand why. So I wanted to just kind of make a video, give my thoughts on it, my review, so that way there is something kind of counterbalancing all the negativity that's coming in. Because like I said, I've read the books probably about 5 times. I'm actually reading them a 6th time now. So I'm a huge fan of the series. And I would just like to kind of give my thoughts on it, both as a standalone film and in relation to the Dark Tower series as a whole. There will be some minor spoilers for all of the books throughout this review from this point going forward, and at the very end I'm going to put in a spoiler section where I will actually go into the details of the film as a whole. So one of the first complaints that I read up on was that the movie was dull. Seriously, with a lot of these complaints, I really don't feel like I saw the same movie that a lot of these critics saw. It does start off kind of slow, but I haven't seen very many action movies that start off with action and go action all the way through. Normally you set up some world building. You set up something that's happening. And to give another example, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park starts off very slow. It builds the atmosphere. It explains what's going on. You don't get the dinosaurs until very far into the movie, and even then, they haven't escaped yet. In a lot of the ways, Dark Tower is very similar. It has a huge world to build. There's a lot of story in these books. And that isn't to say that they don't have a lot of action in them. It's just, it has to tell the story too. And we haven't had pointless action movies for a very long time. And even a lot of the mindless action films that used to be huge did have story in it. So I found that to be extremely odd, especially since once the action starts, it stays pretty steady throughout the rest of the movie. And this movie has a huge body count in it. There are multiple times when they're facing incredible odds. And maybe part of it could be because Roland is just so amazing at what he does that it very rarely feels like he's ever actually facing a genuine threat. But in all honesty, that was the case in the books as well. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good point, but the challenge of the Dark Tower was Roland is an amazing gunslinger. He has tremendous skill. He is virtually untouchable. Throughout the course of the books of the Dark Tower, Roland's quest and his challenge is very rarely with the villains or the monsters that they face. Very rarely does Roland meet anything that poses a genuine challenge to him. And most of what does pose a challenge to him is because of an event that happens very early in the beginning of the Drawing of the Three, which I won't spoil, but drastically changes Roland's life as a gunslinger from that point forward. But for the most part, Roland is very skilled. He does not have any issues with dealing with these kinds of monsters like the Taheen or just anybody in general, really. The challenge for Roland in the Dark Tower has always been a quest for his soul. It's trying to reconcile his romantic nature with the coldness of what his quest is. It's about his humanization and how much of himself he has lost along the way and how much of it he is trying to regain through his Tet, which for those of you who haven't read the book, Katet is kind of a all-encompassing term to refer to one's group or posse. But it's very much about him trying to reclaim that part of him. And the ending of that plays very heavily into that as well, but that'll go into the spoiler section. But for the most part, yeah, the whole statement about it being dull is... I don't get it. There's probably a higher body count in this than the Terminator movies put together. That's that many people and that much action going on in this. Another complaint that was made was that it was confusing. I found this to be a very odd statement as well. Like I said, I saw it the first night that it came out, and I had no trouble following the story at all. So after reading these reviews online, I thought, well, maybe it's because I've read the books. I am such a fan of this, I've studied it, I love this series. So maybe it wasn't confusing to me because I already knew what all this was. I knew what the talking was coming in. I knew what the breakers were. I knew the Man in Black's history, which doesn't get explained very much in this movie, but I think there's talks of a miniseries which will delve into Roland's past, and that'll tie in there. I knew all the different terms and everything. I knew the high speech terms, although they didn't use as much in it as I was expecting them to. So I knew all this stuff going in, so I thought, well, you know what, maybe it's my perspective. Maybe it's because I know so much about this that it wasn't confusing to me. Well, my kids had both wanted to go see it. They are 10 and 12. And other than being violent, there really wasn't anything in it. It wasn't gory, there wasn't any nudity or really sex talk or anything in it. So I took them to go see it. They both loved it. They didn't have any questions. They weren't confused about what was going on. They genuinely loved the movie. They actually had me take them to see it a second time. So yeah, I don't see how it was confusing at all. It's like I said before, I really feel like I watched a completely different movie than a lot of the critics watched. One thing that was mentioned that I do feel is kind of a legitimate complaint is that the villains were kind of 2D. They're not really given a whole lot of emphasis for why they're trying to bring down the tower, what their purpose is. We're told about the Crimson King, but we don't really see him. We don't have any idea what his point or purpose is. This is unfortunately very true to the books as well. Roland's quest is not about the villains that he faces. With the exception of in the first book where he's specifically hunting down the Man in Black, there's really no point where the villains are the forefront of what's going on. Maybe the Wolves of the Kala. And I might be pronouncing that wrong. I might pronounce a lot of things wrong in this review. But in that, there is kind of a build-up to a confrontation with the wolves. That's really the only time. All of the other villains in the series really kind of serve as just a means to an end. Since it's told from Roland's perspective, we don't know the motivation of the other villains. We get glimpses of what the Man in Black's plan is, mostly in the 7th book than any other point in the series, but we don't actually get given an explanation because that's not the side of the story that we're being told. From that perspective, it makes sense. It doesn't make it any less two-dimensional. Would I have liked to see more character development for the villains? Yes, I would. With that being said, however, I felt like they did a wonderful job with Walter, the Man in Black. Walter Paddock, who goes by a million different names, but most commonly referred to as the Man in Black, he is one of the most recurring villains throughout the entire series. He's not the main villain. He's not the one heading everything up, but he has definitely been a player in Roland's life, and is part of the reason why Roland is on this quest to begin with. Throughout the books, he has very limited involvement with the events and actions, and so there's very little character building. He's always kind of off to the side, he's never really directly involved, and unless it relates to Roland and his quest directly, we don't ever really get to see what's going on with him. We hear about what happened with him. We know that he is a feared character, but we never see anything that should make him feared. He never really struck me as a very intimidating character. This movie fixes that. We see why he is such an intimidating force. You get to see how dark and menacing he is. Speaking of the Man in Black, I was a little worried when they announced the casting of him as Matthew McConaughey. In all honesty, he knocked it out of the park. The casting in this is entirely spot on. The actor they got to play Roland, Idris Elba, is amazing. I have heard some controversy about the fact that Roland is traditionally described as being white in the books, and Idris Elba is obviously not. But honestly, there's no one else who could have played Roland better. I'll stand by that. I think that he was amazing. The humor that he delivers in it is the same deadpan delivery that Roland kind of shows throughout the course of the books, where he's very no-nonsense. He's very much, I'm on my quest, I'm doing what I have to do. But you do get to see some of the softer sides to him as well. You get to see the caring sides. And a lot of it isn't shown through words, through dialogue. It's actions. It's how he reacts to things. Honestly, I loved it. I would love to see them continue the series of movies with Idris Elba as the role of Roland. The boy who played Jake, I don't remember what his name is. I should have looked it up before I started, but he is also absolutely amazing. I know that child actors have a certain stigma, but he did remarkably well. And honestly, I didn't see any actors in the movie who didn't give a solid performance. I never saw, like, a tick or a facial movement or a reading or anything that really kind of sucked me out of the moment. It was all done very well. I hadn't actually read about anything where they've complained about that, but I just did want to state that I found the acting to be wonderful in it. And a lot of the direction as well. From this point going forward, we're going to be getting into some spoiler territory for the books. I will say that if you have not read the 7 books and you have any intention of reading them, you should probably stop watching the review right now. The ending to the 7th book is extremely controversial, largely divisive in the fan base. I love it. I think that it's the only way they could have ended the books. A lot of people hate it. And understandably so. Even Stephen King himself wrote before that point in the book, you've gotten to the point that you want to get to. You don't have to read anymore. When an author is sitting there telling you, hey look, you really don't want to read the rest of this, it's probably something you're not going to like, or that's going to be very divisive anyway. So, we are going to be talking about the very controversial ending to the book, and a lot of other elements throughout the other books. If that's something that you do not want to have spoiled for you, like I said, please stop now. Alright, are you still with me? Cool. In the 7th book, Roland reaches the Dark Tower. He has faced everything that has happened to him up to that point. He is coming to it without any of his group. He has lost Jake and Eddie and Oi to being killed on the quest. And Susanna, devastated by the loss of everyone that she's cared about except for Roland, leaves. She finds a portal to another version of New York and she is gone. So, Roland climbs up the tower alone. And as he's going towards the tower, he thinks to himself, on the way, when I left the battle at Jericho Hill, I should have stopped and grabbed the Horn of Eld. It's what I should have done. I should be blowing the Horn of Eld as I head to the tower. He also wishes he had both guns to lay down at the base of the tower. So Roland goes into the tower, and it's a complete, just, overview of his life. Each floor is dedicated to a different important part of his life. And it starts off lighthearted and him fondly remembering things from his life. But then it starts getting to the point where he became a gunslinger. And things start getting darker and darker and darker, to the point where he can't deal with what he has become anymore. And he doesn't want to view this anymore. What used to be a fond remembrance of who he was has become his own living hell. And so he's rushing through the rooms to get to the very top of the tower. He gets to the top of the tower, he opens the door, and with dawning realization and absolute terror, he is staring at the Mohaine Desert, the beginning of the first book. Roland is caught in a time loop, and has been for several iterations. We don't know how many. Could be 5, could be 100, could be a couple thousand. All we know is that he has reached the top of the tower several times already. He tries to turn to run, but he is pulled back through the doorway into the Mohaine Desert, with his grip on what has happened slowly fading from his memory, remembering only what he remembered when he landed in the desert. He reaches back and feels that he has the Horn of Eld, and thinks that he is glad that he picked it up after the Battle of Jericho Hill. And the book ends on the line that the first book started on. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Why did I explain the whole ending to you? Well, I explained the whole ending to you because in this movie, Roland has the Horn of Eld. That is very important, because this means that it is a sequel to the Dark Tower books. A lot of people have been complaining about the movie being drastically different from the books, with Jake's backstory being changed, with the fact that the events don't happen exactly as they happened in the book, that so many elements from the later books were brought in earlier, things of that nature. This explains it. Some people may look at that as a cop-out, but I really think that that makes a lot of sense. Just because we assumed when we read that closing statement that everything that happened from that point going forward would be the same, except that Roland would have the horn, is kind of ridiculous. Roland is on a quest for redemption of his soul. The tower does not feel like he is pure enough. He feels bitter about his betrayal of Jake, letting Jake die, letting so many others die on the quest. Roland has to purify himself. He has to try to get to the tower with his soul intact. And throughout the books, you kind of see how at the end of the Gunslinger, when Roland lets Jake fall to his death so that he can catch the man in black, how that preyed on him, how that tore him up. And while he made several efforts to fix that, and even went so far as to somehow use the drawing of the three and also the portals that you kind of see in the movie to draw Jake back into his world so that he can effectively have a second chance, it's still something that preys on him because it's what he did. He didn't know that he would have a chance to save Jake later on. He didn't know that he would have a chance to bring Jake into the fold. He just knew that he had a choice between dropping this innocent child who had nothing to do with the tower at all and just happened to get there by a combination of bad luck and chance. He just let this child die just so that he could fill his own quest. This movie takes a different route in that he has a chance to leave Jake behind. He has a chance to save Jake. It's not the same scenario. It's a completely different scenario, actually. But he saves Jake. He doesn't leave him behind. He doesn't just let him martyr himself. He rescues him. In many ways, this is the first step in Roland's redemption. A lot of people were kind of wondering why so much of the other characters have changed. Elmer Chambers being a loving firefighter father instead of the completely uncaring business executive that he was in the books. But that brings up the question of, well, just because Roland's only repeating certain parts of the same quest, Does that mean that everything is the same? I mean, we've already seen that parts of Roland's past has changed. Events that happened before the start of the next cycle have been altered. Because Roland didn't pick up the Horn of Eld when he got to the Mohaine Desert. He picked up the Horn of Eld back at Jericho Hill. While Ka is a wheel and certain things keep repeating, that doesn't mean that the events are exactly the same. What a lot of people are calling a weakness of the film is actually a very strong strength of it, in that it's telling the story, but it's still different. All these different events have happened. It's actually a rather brilliant way to spin it. Now, in all honesty, when I walked into the theater, I was expecting to see the gunslinger. I was expecting to see everything happen just like in the book. I expected to see elements of the drawing of the three work their way into it because I'd seen the promotional material, but I wasn't expecting a completely different storyline. But I didn't feel like that hampered it because I knew this was a sequel. I knew there were going to be things that were different. And I don't understand why so many people are taking such a strong offense to this. Maybe, I have known that a lot of people have said, oh, I haven't read all the books, but I've read the first couple, and this is drastically different. But if you haven't read all the books, you don't understand the significance of it. And that's kind of where my statement is that it doesn't ruin it if you know the backstory. But if you don't know the backstory, how would you know? A couple of the things that don't really have a category, but that I do want to kind of touch on, is they brought a lot of elements from the other books into this one. They are basically setting it up as like a storyline to cover the entire book series. You see, when Stephen King started writing the books, he didn't know where he was going with it. He's even said that between the writing of The Wizard and Glass and The Wolves of the Kala, people were asking him, okay, where's the tower going to go? Where's the quest going to go? Because we're not going to live to see the end of it. And he didn't know. He couldn't have written in elements that would encompass these later events. Now, when he went back and finished the series, he also went back and rewrote the earlier books, so there were mentions of them throughout. But here, since the entire story has already been told, and he's got the ideas, he's able to introduce things in a different order. From the first movie, we already have the Taheen introduced, we have mentions of the Crimson King, we have the portals, although they're never really explained that way in the books, they are kind of introduced. The Wizard's Rainbow, we get to see aspects of that. I believe we get to see actually the one that's referred to as the pink grapefruit used in the movie. The Breakers are introduced. So they've changed them a little bit, and that is one thing that I'm not really sure if I agree with, but we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation. The base at Devartois is introduced immediately. So they were able to go ahead and start building the world from the very beginning. Okay, going back to my statement on the Breakers. In the book, and they do mention this briefly in the movie, but it's more so like a passing mention, the Breakers aren't actually shooting energy beams at the tower. There are beams that hold the tower up, and there are 12 guardians. There are basically 6 beams that stretch. I don't know if they ever really explain like the starting point and the ending point, but they do say that they are guarded by these guardians who are supposed to help protect the beams. They're supposed to defend them. There are 6 beams that go from one end through the tower and go to another end. And these beams are basically just invisible, giant magnetic fields that empower the tower. They help hold it up. The breakers in the book are actually at bases designed to destroy the beams. They're placed underneath the path of one of the beams. They get a bunch of psychic kids together who are powered by twin brain energy. That's a very poor explanation, but it's the best I can do. And they're there to destroy the beams. Why are they trying to destroy the beams? Because they're trying to bring down the tower. Now, the breakers aren't necessarily the ones who want to do this. They just kind of got roped into it without having much of a choice. The Taheen are really running the facility. So, in this, they have the breakers shooting energy beams directly at the tower. And saying that when a powerful enough beam hits it, it'll fall. But when the attack on the tower happens, They also mention beamquakes, which wouldn't make sense since they're not attacking beams and the beams aren't actually explained in any way in the movie. It's one of the times when the movie, for all the explaining that it does, kind of traps itself. It was like they tried to film it as they were attacking the beams, but maybe a target audience didn't get it, or they didn't have enough dialogue to explain it. Maybe we'll get to find out more when the deleted scenes come out, see if there was anything that was shot for this to explain it better. But, like I said, they mention the beamquakes. They don't mention the devastating effects that they have, but they do mention them. But if you don't mention the beams and why the beamquakes are happening, it kind of lessens it. See, a beamquake happens when a beam that's holding the tower up actually breaks. And it is described as being absolutely devastating for anything along the path of the beam. The reason why these tremors can be felt throughout all of Midworld and throughout the other worlds like Keystone Earth and all that is because they are massive. These aren't just some minor earthquakes. This is actually the destruction of something that's holding up the nexus points of all reality. You're going to feel the effects. And that was really kind of something that I felt like wasn't explained as well as it could have been. And they kind of shoehorned in, oh, well, the breakers are attacking the tower. It works. It doesn't lessen the experience at all. But it definitely does make it feel like part of what's going on isn't explained very well. One point that I do want to hit up real quick is there was one critical statement that said that, oh, this is just another, young boy chosen one story. I really feel like that was somebody who had no idea where the book series came from. Jake is chosen, but he's not the only one. Roland's entire group is important. There's Jake, there's Eddie, there's Susanna, there's Oi, and there's Roland himself. All of them play a key role in the series. Jake is one of the most important ones, for reasons that we'll get into in the spoiler section at the end of the video. But he is one of the most important characters, at least in my humble opinion. And he also is one of the only characters to appear in every single book. It's Jake, Roland, and honestly I can't even remember if the Man in Black appears in all of them. So the only two that I can say definitively appear in every single book are Roland and Jake. Now, true, in the Drawing of the Three, Jake's mention is very brief, but the events of it very specifically involve him. So to say, oh, it's just another Chosen One story, it really kind of shows that they didn't understand the source material. Now, true, you shouldn't have to see the source material to go in and enjoy a film. But to dock it points on that, to say that, oh, this is just another cliched story, is very unfair. As I've said, all of the Quartet are important. Jake is one of the most important because of the impact that what happens in The Gunslinger has on him throughout the entire series. But that doesn't mean he's the most important. That doesn't mean he's the only chosen one. Everyone involved serves a purpose in the tower. Everyone does their part. Just because we haven't gotten the other characters yet doesn't mean that this is just, oh, another chosen one, like Harry Potter or Katniss Everdeen. No. Jake is the first of a group of, well, I guess technically he would be the second of a group of 5 who are chosen in this quest. If we get another movie, which I'm really hoping we do, but if we do, we will get to see Eddie and Susanna. And I don't know if they would bring Oi in until the 3rd movie or not. Since they don't go exactly with the books, it's kind of hard to tell what events are going to happen when. But they did say that they were going to base the next movie on the drawing of the three if it gets made, which is where Eddie and Susanna are introduced. So overall, those are my thoughts on the Dark Tower movie. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was an amazing action film. I thought it set the groundwork for the future movies, if there are any, very well. I think it works extremely well as a standalone movie as well. So if they had to end it here, it does kind of end on a point where everything is kind of covered, but there are aspects of it which haven't been delved into. So we can see the Crimson King. We can see additional aspects of it. And there are also a lot of elements of the book, even concerning Walter and the Taheen, that we haven't really delved into as much as we could have. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to be looking to pick it up immediately when it comes out on DVD. I'm probably going to end up buying 2 copies, one for myself and one for my kids, because they absolutely loved it as well. That was one of the first things they asked as soon as we finished watching it is, "Hey Dad, when that comes out, can we get it on DVD?" So, overall, I think it was an amazing movie. I think that it's got a severe critical lashing, which is largely unwarranted. If you're fans of the book series, as long as you understand that it isn't exactly like the books, you're going to enjoy it. It's very true to the source material's tone and style, while changing some certain key elements. Those changes are not bad, and are duly explained through the course of the books, maybe not necessarily through the movie just yet. Whether or not it will be explained in the movies or not, I don't know. Personally, I really loved this movie. I would like to see maybe a more faithful recreation of the books as well. But it isn't like, oh, I want them to stop what they're doing and create a faithful recreation of the books. What I want to see happen is I want to see them finish the series of movies, like they're on the path to now. And then once they get done with that, I want them to go back and shoot the books as movies. Will certain elements be repeated? Will certain elements be very similar? Probably. But honestly, with the cast that they have in here, I know it would probably take forever to get made, and they wouldn't be able to keep the actors, unfortunately, but I would love to see the original books made into movies as well. This movie got me so super excited for where the series is going. It's really kind of hard for me to describe, but as with most things, it's entirely subjective. You may see it, you may have been a huge fan of the books and absolutely hated it. But for me, it did everything right as an action movie, it did everything right as a Dark Tower adaptation, and it did everything right as a Dark Tower sequel. Thank you for watching. Peace out, YouTube.